Hey everybody, it's First Warning Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. It's that time of the year again. It's time for my annual winter outlook. I've been doing this for 17 years now, and hopefully this year, because of the election and everything going on, this will kind of give you something to distract you or think about. And I'll be fully transparent. I will tell everybody this. I love snow. I grew up loving snow. That's why I became a meteorologist. But I'll tell you one thing, as I've gotten older, as much as I love snow, I always tell people I like getting the forecast right more. So let's get right to the forecast for 2020-21 for what's going to happen here in the Carolinas. So first things first, we're going to talk about La Nina this year. La Nina is a big driving force of our climate and a big driving force for our winter weather. So let me show you this full screen and I'll show you what is La Nina. Well, it's cooler water in the equatorial Pacific, and you can see that on the screen there. It's this part of the Pacific Ocean off the west coast of South America, and this has a huge impact on the jet stream over the United States. So this is why I always tell people we are connected to a lot of these things that happen around the world. Now, we have a pretty good track record since 1950 of keeping track of how El Nino and La Nina affects our weather. Now, La Nina typical winter pattern looks like this, and you'll see it on the screen. We typically have warm and dry winters. That's been a recurring. Now, that's the average. It doesn't mean every winter, but that seems to be the overarching theme. And I always tell people, if you love snow, you do not want to see a La Nina. It is by far the worst setup for winter weather here in the southeast. That's just a fact. And I've been keeping some pretty diligent stats on all of this, and I'm going to show them to you right now. I'll pop them up on the screen here. So here's the interesting thing about La Nina winters. So if you go back since 1950 when we were able to track this, El Nino years, we average about 5.4 inches of snow in Charlotte. During the La Nina years, it's 4.4, and La Nada is kind of what I jokingly call when you're in between. There's nothing. It's not warm or cool in the Pacific. It's just neutral. We actually average 5.9. Those tend to be our best years for snow. But here's the interesting thing about La Nina this year. I went back and looked and see, is it a strong La Nina, a moderate La Nina, or a weak one? Well, there is a little bit of a correlation. If we have a weak to moderate La Nina, which is what we're expecting this year, we actually average just a little bit more snow than we do in a typical La Nina year. So basically, there is a little hope here that this year might trend a little bit higher than your average La Nina year. So we keep track of that stuff, and that's one of the things I look at right off the bat. And Chris Mulcahy pulled up this graphic for me and did some little legwork for me, but I wanted to show you this full screen here, just to look at La Nina winters since 2000. You can see every single winter that we've had a La Nina since 2000 has been well below average, except 2010, 2011. You can see it on the screen there. What's interesting about that winter, we actually ended up above average with 6.1. But not only did we end up below average, a lot of these years we had a trace. Now, this is my favorite stat about Charlotte weather. 142 years of record keeping, we have never had zero snow in a winter. We've had a trace, which is enough snow is falling, but it didn't get to 1/10 of an inch, which is the smallest measurement of snow, but it did snow. You didn't get zero. So that's happened 11 times. So that's actually a pretty low number considering we only average 4.3 inches of snow. So you can see La Nina winters are not good news for snow lovers. So what does this mean for our upcoming winter? Well, typically means warm and dry, but there's something else I look at every year now, and it's pretty important, and that is Arctic sea ice. And this is something you're probably asking yourself, what does Arctic sea ice have to do with us here in the Carolinas? So when I look back at the trend, I'm going to turn my camera off here so I'm not in the way. You can see the trend in snowfall in the last 35 years has been pretty low. I mean, 4.3 is our average. We've got a couple years recently that have seen some spikes. But the reason we look at Arctic sea ice, and I'm going to show you that right here, is we have seen a warming trend during the winters. This is part of climate change, but it is a big part of that warming Arctic. And here's the Arctic sea ice. So this year, Arctic sea ice is that blue line. You can see it on the map right there. And I'll pull myself back up here where I can grab my cursor. Look at that. Look how well below the average this is. So why is the lack of sea ice so important to our winters here in the Carolinas? Well, this has a big impact on the jet stream as well. So we're going to go back to the graphics here. Sea ice up in the Arctic, if we have normal sea ice, which I'll show you, it looks something like that about this time of the year. When we have that average sea ice, the jet streams are pretty stratiform. What I mean by that is the jet streams are pretty much lined up like this. They will go back and forth together, and we will get cold air, we'll get snow. They tend to bottle up the cold air up here. That's when the polar vortex is strong. Believe it or not, when the polar vortex is weak is when we get cold air down here, and that's because of warming up in the Arctic. Let me show you what's happened to the Arctic sea ice. There's a lot of research that shows as the sea ice retreats, it causes ridges of high pressure to push up into the Arctic, and the jet stream becomes really what we call amplified. And to kind of explain what that means, I'm going to pull this back out. It means the jet stream gets real zigzaggy. And what that does is it drives really warm air up into the Arctic, which sometimes forces cold air south. But here's the thing, when we see these big troughs and ridges, if you're under one of these ridges, it's a mega ridge. It's really warm, really dry. That's when we get our record-breaking warmth in the winter, and that's what we could see this winter with the loss of sea ice up here. But I will caution you, one of the things about this pattern, which I find really interesting, is that sometimes we get stuck in this southeast ridge for weeks on end, but occasionally this mega trough will come to the southeast. So basically what that means is in these La Nina winters, you could go 3, 4, 5 weeks of above average temperatures and then have 1 week of just brutal cold and snow. And then you go back to the warm. So you get a lot of extremes. So there's a chance that this could be a warm winter because it's warm the majority of the time, but we still get a couple big storms which pushes our snowfall total above that 4.3. And for that reason, I'm actually going to go a little bit wetter than average this year. So let's look at the checklist. This is my annual checklist. I'm going to pull the camera off so you can see it. Here are all the main factors I look at. El Nino, La Nina phase. This year we're in a La Nina. Near average snowfall in Siberia. If you watch me for years, when we have above average snowfall over in Siberia in the autumn, that tends to mean cold and snowy winters. Arctic sea ice, near record lows, that's not good. And climate change and sea level temperatures, all running well above average, as we know the trend. So when you put all these together, all of my check marks here kind of point to a warm and dry winter, which lines up with your typical La Nina winter. So let's get right to the forecast. I'm going to pull them up here. I'm going to come full screen here and I'll throw them up in the monitor here first and we'll talk about it. So here's my winter forecast for temperatures. I'm going to stop it right about here. I expect us to be above average. There is just nothing that I'm seeing that shows a cold winter. So if you want cold weather, this is not the way this is panning out, because the reason I believe this is we've only had 30% of the last 20 winters have been below average. So that means 70% of the time we're having above average temperatures in the winter. And I think with La Nina, you can bank on this. And I do think the really high above average areas are going to be down there towards the coast, back towards the western part of the Carolinas. I think it's only going to be slightly below because I do think we're going to get some cold weather outbreaks, but I'm expecting above average temperatures. Rainfall. Now this includes all precipitation. Here's the one thing that I'm doing a little bit off kilter this year, which doesn't line up with La Nina. I do think the pattern of having wet weather, which we've had the last 2 years, is going to continue, but I don't think it's going to be as wet as it's been the last couple years. I do expect above average rainfall. We have just had buckets and buckets of rainfall over the last 2 years, and the winters have been incredibly wet. They haven't been cold because it's all been moisture in the form of rain. Remember, it takes cold air and moisture together to get snow. We've had plenty of the moisture part, but we haven't had much of the snow. And for that reason, my winter forecast for snowfall, here it is. We're going to bring it up, and I'm going to stop it right here. I'm going with below average snow and ice this year. Not well below, but slightly below for the mountains and foothills, that area highlighted in the lighter yellow, and a little bit more moderately below from the Piedmont east. But I will think this is probably the lowest confidence part of my forecast, and the reason I say that is I think there is some up potential that we could see 1 or 2 big storms. And I think if that's the one overarching thing about this winter, I think the temperatures will be warm. Overall, remember, it's the average temperature over the entire season, not just for a week or two. But I do think there will be potential that a week or two during the season, we're going to have that big trough set up over us, or we're going to get blocking in the North Atlantic. And that's typical when the sea ice loss is like it is up in the Arctic. Sometimes you can get big troughs on the East Coast where cold air is all the way down in the Carolinas and it's warm all the way up into the Dakotas. That happens quite a bit, and that could be enough. Remember, one good storm that pushes us over 4.3 inches of snow will actually give us above average snowfall. So there's a possibility, and why I think this is the lowest confidence of my forecast this year, that we could get a couple big storms, 1 or 2, that push us above average, even though the temperature stays above average as well. So we could have a warm and snowy winter, believe it or not, if things work out. And I'll go back to that first graphic again, because I think this is important to show that if you look in the weak and moderate La Nina winters, there's a 2/10 of an inch difference between a strong La Nina year. So there is some correlation that there is a little bit more snow in these winters, even though overall La Ninas are definitely the worst for snow lovers. I have a huge write-up on our website, wcnc.com, if you want to get more into the details. Again, there are other things I look at that I didn't talk about because it gets kind of in the weeds, but I think the trend of our warm winters is going to continue again this year. If you want to see snowy weather here in the southeast, we need to get a good El Nino or a good La Nada. We need a good storm track, and we need a lot of Arctic air. So far in the last couple of years, we've seen nothing like that. Thanks for tuning in, and if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. Thanks, everybody.